hello, folks. We are in episode 9, and we've agreed that not to miss one day for the next, 21 more days. So we have a
Yep.
complete package of 30 days consistently in a row. So we're going to go for that. Today, we're relating to the theme of the podcast. It's called exit strategy. And that doesn't just apply to entrepreneurs who want to exit from their startup in 5-10 years time, millionaires or unicorn billionaires. It's not just about exit strategy in terms of investments like cryptocurrency. That's part of the conversation that I've wanted to talk about. But just today, we're talking about exiting from a stuck mindset, even, right? Getting the exit strategy, having a way, a framework to get out of biases when we've got these horse blinkers. In fact, I use this, Dom, one of the analogies in the VC incubator that I ran a year ago. And this was like in session 1, I challenged the people that were joining the incubator program. I said, you guys have got horse blinkers on. Do you know how I know that? Because I've had to deal with startup founders for the past 15 years, and they always have horse blinkers on. So let's start from here. Let's start with the honest reality that I think you guys have got horse blinkers and you're not seeing the woods for the trees. So that sets the tone. So yeah, great subject. Over to you.
Well, that's a hell of a question to ask, honestly, because even if you state it as proof to me, you don't, right? It'll make somebody think at the very minimum. Maybe they are coming in open-minded, but I'd bet on you on that one because look, it happens to all of us, right? It's a fine line between having a vision and an inspiration and staying true to that, right? And making sure that you preserve it, right? This is why you started this thing. This is why you're going through all these challenges. This is why you're putting yourself out there in the world and taking this tremendous risk, which listen, it's maybe not quite what it was 20, 30 years ago. And you had to spend a lot more money up front to get started, but hell, it's still a big risk to start a company, dedicate all that time to it, and have no idea where you're going to end up at the end of that, So, but at the same time, you can't be just stuck and not even willing to entertain other ideas, other options, other concepts. That's not the journey, right? We talked about the hero journey last time. And what's a big part of that? Big part of that's the transformation we go through on the way. And it's awesome to have a vision to change the world or to solve a really difficult problem or whatever, but you have no idea if you really know the solution yet. And if you don't allow yourself to stay open to things, you're not going to get there. You have to be willing to do that. And maybe, the most important thing you can do for somebody in consulting or mentoring or as a business partner is to challenge each other's biases a little bit. Try to find out where they lie, right? Like where is this person? What are their blind spots? Because if you can do that for each other, hell, I mean, you're ahead of a lot of people, as you're saying, right? Because most people are in that spot.
100%. I call it. This is what I think of as risk management. A lot of companies think of risk as just being compliance, or some of them will think of it in terms of financial stability of the company going forward, depending on different changes in the market scenarios. I always think of risk as being the assumptions that we're making.
Sure.
And if you're making the wrong assumptions, if you're assuming things about your competition that they're doing or they're not doing, or the market, whatever, it's the assumptions that we make that can kill us. Speaking about hero's journey, I like the movies Doctor Strange. I guess that's the title of the movies. And the Buddhist lady, the bald Buddhist lady in there, she says to Doctor Strange something like, you have to let go.
Yeah.
Right. And for Doctor Strange to actually tap into these magical powers of being able to fix his accident that he had with his nerve damage in the car accident, something like that. You have to let go. And it's worth even using that as a mantra. One of our magic beans that we're going to be collecting is just to be able to look in the mirror in the morning when you're doing brushing your teeth, and just think to yourself, what do I need to let go of today?
Yeah.
What have I been resisting? What am I hanging on to? I listened to a podcast recently, and the guy said one day in the not too distant future, maybe 20 years or 10 years, whatever, one day we're going to wake up and the pace of change is going to be so dramatic that we're going to have to reevaluate. We're going to like we're going to have to check the news
Like every day.
and we're going to have to reevaluate our entire perspective about our life experience. If you've had your cup of coffee or your breakfast.
It's going to be mind blowing. I mean, I'm looking at just AI apps and how fast they're moving and how many are coming out and how much they're getting, how rapidly they're iterating and getting better. Right. And we know this is nothing like artificial general intelligence is coming. Super intelligence is coming. That's a given now. It's not when, it's not if, it's when, or certainly something like it. And that thing is going to be able to self-iterate at warp speed, like unimaginable speed, the way in which it's going to be able to learn. It's going to make, human IQ look ridiculous, laughable, right? But, to your point of, what do I need to let go of? That's huge because expectations are a bitch, right? Like I've thought a lot just personally about this lately. Like expectations don't really serve you when you think about it, right? Having an expected outcome, it's like that doesn't really serve you because it can only be disappointing most of the time. It's very rarely going to match up. Like even if it's a good outcome, that you're likely to be disappointed because it wasn't quite like this, right? And I think that's in a way part of what holds a founder in place with that vision I was talking about at the beginning. It's like, yeah, but it's not about getting there. It's supposed to go like this. This is supposed to be the way it's solved. And they're like almost disappointed when there's another way to do it, right? I don't know if that's an ego thing or an ownership thing, but like, yeah, man. I mean, there's a lot. Let go. Let go. Let go.
In well functioning growth departments, and unfortunately, the concept of growth hacking became so popular that it made the growth function really superficial. Because basically, the growth hacker is the person who knows a new way to do like social media or SEO or like some little tidbit. It's like a technique. There's a new technique and we're going to call that growth hacking. The true growth function is experimentation. It's to say, we have a hypothesis, and you don't put yourself into the frame of a desired expectation. I think it aligns perfectly with what you're saying. We're saying these are the variables that we can control. And we're going to try one way and we're going to try another way. And we're going to observe without bias what happens. What can we learn from that? And this is the truth. This is the essence of what the growth movement or growth function really started from. And it's kind of lost its way a little bit, in my view, with all of the growth hacking techniques. But experimentation achieves that kind of a perspective that you're not setting a goal and everything like becomes, okay, this is what we got to do. You're being more dynamic. You're moving with you're shifting with the change. As long as you're being clear on what you're trying to learn. Right. That's one of the keys of this. That's what makes growth difficult, is to say, here's a hypothesis. We want to disprove ourselves. It's the opposite. You're not that you got a goal and you want to be right and you want to get to that target, but you're saying, this is the direction we want to go. And I think we can achieve this if this, this, and this. And now I want to prove myself wrong by creating the variables and the variants of my experiment. And I'm going to see the reality of what happens.
Right. Because if you're right, great. You've bulletproofed it, right? You've taken, it's hard to play devil's advocate against our own ideas, right? It is, your ideas, again, we're especially like a knowledge worker, your brain is your instrument. Your brain is your tool. That's the tool you go to work with. You don't swing a hammer I guess you could say your laptop, but at the end of the day, our product, let's say, our individual product is our minds and what they can come up with and how they can solve these problems and what, all of that stuff, and I guess but something you said drove me back to the thing we were talking about before this, which was I watched this guy, Chris Williamson. Shout out, great guy. He's got a great podcast. Totally check that out. And he was doing an interview with Eric Weinstein, who's a physicist and just an overall really intelligent guy. And what they were talking about, which I think is relevant, is the idea of shared consensus reality. That if people don't have agreement on reality, you know, there's no conversation to be had because you can't have a conversation about solutions because you're not talking about the same problem. You can't have a conversation about resolution of any kind. I mean, that's what we're seeing in American politics. It's the right has a different reality than the left. They don't believe the world is the same at all. They're living in two different worlds right now. And so, never mind get to a policy like healthcare, they can't solve healthcare. Like the debate's no longer in the United States what it has been for decades, which was, nationalize healthcare or private. How do we save money? How do we do it better? That was the debate, but no one ever debated whether or not healthcare needed to be solved, because it was a cost that was ballooning at 20% annually and so on and so forth, right? But I'm imagining now, the right would come in and say, well, the problem with healthcare is like Dr. Fauci and these assholes who are just throwing needles at us and trying to kill us. And the left would be going, no, it's that, there's not the right amount of care for minorities or something. I don't know, and they can't even agree that like on the actual problem, right? And you were working on this the other day at work. We were talking about this like framework, like, it's probably worth it, especially for the tough issues that you might face. Definitely as like a consultant or something, I would say this is huge, right? Is to say, start with, hey, okay, let's frame the problem. Let's make sure we're on the same page. What problem are we trying to solve? Okay, we're trying to solve this problem. Great. Do we both agree that, there's this element and that element and the other one? Okay, cool. It's like, and then you can proceed. I thought that was really great how you were kind of framing that out. I don't know. I mean, talk about that a little bit more. Like, how does somebody go about making sure that they're even talking about the same things?
Yeah, it's funny. Like problem first, solution second, right? And it happens in product development. Again, it's part of the force blinkers that I said about startup founders. They might be so in love with their piece of technology that they've got. And then another expression that's used in industry is they're a solution looking for a problem.
Yep.
Right. They've got something. They think it's cool, it's new, it's novel, it's different, but who cares? What difference does it make for anyone in the real world? So that's where they have to go and find a customer and back engineer. Sometimes it might work out that way, especially if it's a scientific discovery somehow, a new graphene material or whatever, and then they've got to find, okay, what are the characteristics, and now what are the use cases, and now what are the backtracking to the product. Usually things don't happen that way. So if you can't, you have to have a shared language, and you got to get, like, you can have a series of questions. What is the goal that we're trying to achieve? If you don't know that, or loosely speaking, what is the thing that we like? What is our experiment? What is our hypothesis, etc.? You've got to be able to see what are the questions that develop the assumptions that we're making, so we know we're making the same assumptions. We're always making assumptions. We have to be on the same page that these are the assumptions that we're making.
Then like you said earlier, but assumptions, right? That's huge. I just want to highlight that. You got to be making the same assumptions, right? I mean, just.
And that, yeah, it's like, it's funny how these things, and I think we'll find that over our conversations, we'll find a pattern, and we'll probably describe similar things in different ways and find a framework, which is, you just mentioned that, a framework of thinking of like, we're talking about exit strategy.
Mm-hmm.
This is the theme of the podcast. How do we navigate into the future with all of its variance and change and acceleration and opportunity, and not stay stuck in a swamp of our own bias and our own inaccuracies and our own stupid assumptions, so that we can have an easier time of moving into that changing future and maximizing opportunity and serving the people and the causes and the values that we care about. It's a constant reevaluation. To the exit strategy is like one of the analogies is, if a man steps twice into a river, right? First of all, it's no longer the same river because the water has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And if the man is really being a man, it's not the same man either, right? Because man is constantly changing as well. So we have to get used to that and develop frameworks, and frameworks are ways to ask questions. So I guess that's a theme that we can keep coming back to as well, is what are the kind of questions that we need to be asking ourselves across all of this spectrum of different things that we're trying to exit from in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like we're talking about, what are the assumptions you have? In many ways, not only do you discover them, but you probably need to, let them go. Like we were talking about earlier in the podcast, the idea of letting go. It's like you have to exit these positions constantly. Otherwise, you're confined by them, right? They become your prison, right? To use another sort of spiritual concept is, in Buddhism, there's a lot of talk about the gateless gate. This idea that it's right there. It's like enlightenment's the simplest thing in the world. And that's what makes it so difficult, because it's so simple and everybody wants to make it really complex. They want to like do this, and you got to stand on your head, you got to meditate for 100 years or what the fuck ever, right? It has to be this like really deep, extremely difficult, extremely complicated journey, or it's not real. And it's like you were saying, well, what are we trying to actually do here? Have a complicated journey? That's not what we're trying to do. I thought the goal was enlightenment. I thought the goal was awareness of a totally different order of magnitude. But so much of that beliefs, right? Limiting beliefs that we have, I mean, it's so much about that letting go, exiting positions like we've talked about before. This idea that like maybe it's not about when you buy, but when you sell is the bigger problem to solve, right? Or thing to think about.
That's profoundly affected my financial well-being twice. Twice, right?
We've both been very rich, or maybe not very, but well off.
Yeah. Well, the top of the 2017 and 21 markets, and it's all about that bias. And the bias becomes, well, since it's been going up for the past 6 months or a year, it's going to keep going up for the next 6 months or a year, and then I'll be buying, catamarans and yachts. So let me just hodl, right? The hodl mentality. You need to be able to escape from the hodl mentality. So I got this checklist, this that you mentioned, alignment troubleshoot checklist. If you're in a group and you're trying to collaborate and achieve some things together, you might start to feel stuck in some tension every now and then. So we just started as a group to draft what this checklist would be. So here's what we got so far. Are we agreeing on the goal? Right? Mm-hmm. Do we agree that what we're trying to achieve is what we're trying to achieve? The next one is, are we understanding each other? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's amazing that we have to put that into a checklist of adults that are trying to collaborate on something, but it's so true. And you find it when you get into tension, and most groups get into tension at some point. Are we even understanding each other's perspective and our point? Third one we got here is, are we disagreeing? If we are disagreeing, is it due to beliefs that we have, values that we have, or is it a difference of personality style maybe? We've got to be able to probe these kind of things. Next one is, are we missing information? So maybe we have a different context, or we have a different set of data that we're relying on in the back of our mind, are we clear with each other that we're looking at the same information? Or are we missing some information? Next one is, do we agree on the time requirement for agreement?
Mm.
Do we agree on the time requirement for agreement? So yeah, we might be thinking about how we're going to build this organizational purpose and deliver everything. And one of us is thinking like, I'm thinking of this from a 5-year perspective, and the other one's thinking from a 6-month perspective.
Right.
You gotta check that you're on the same page about your time frame, so that you're again having a relevant conversation and not butting heads unnecessarily. And the last one that we put on our little draft list here is, what are the drivers or the motivators towards the goal?
Mm.
Are we trying to achieve the goal for a similar shared reason? Because again, that changes how you might approach the goal. So, and this was just the start. This was in one of our workshops. Um, and this will continue and we'll refine it. But this is what I'm saying about questions and assumptions.
Yeah.
Um, Develop your own framework of questions to uncover those assumptions for your own self, for your team, whether you got tension or not, but especially if you're coming into tension.
I would say something that could be quickly added that came to mind. So I don't think it's quite addressed any of those points is, what's the skin in the game? Is this like somebody's not going to be able to, pay their rent next week? And, that's their sense of urgency. And they're also supporting an entire family. And the other person's like, you know, personally well off and, whatever. Or one person's got 4,000 hours into this thing and the other person's got 50. One's part time, one's full time, right? Because, skin in the game will drastically change people's perspective on everything. And after reading that book, it's the famous Nassim Taleb, I believe is his name. Great thinker, recommend that book. But that's an important one. That changed things for me. Let me just
Anti-fragile, correct?
That's the other one. Yeah. Well, one's called Skin in the Game, I believe. And the other
Oh,
one's
okay.
like
I didn't read that one.
anti-fragile. Yeah,
Okay.
he's smart. I mean, it's what he said, really what Skin in the Game boiled down to for him is he was fundamentally questioning the whole idea of government and leadership, and that the problem with modern democratic leadership is that they don't have skin in the game, because if they fail, they don't feel it. If they fuck it up, they don't feel it. They're in a privileged class, they're in a different place, and they're spending government money. They're not spending money they earned. You have a totally different perspective when you're investing your capital than when you're investing someone else's, right?
Mm.
Because you're not going to feel the loss the same way. And government is even more sort of abstract, right? Like, oh, it's the taxpayer till, I don't know, spin the wheel, see what happens. Let's go to Vegas, right? Like, so and we don't seem to have consequences, right? White collar crime specifically, or even politicians. You only hardly get in trouble for anything. But I brought this up. This is interesting from our friend ChatGPT. I said, what are the different definitions of exit strategy? To see what come up. And, it said this typical startups and venture capitals, away from solid stake, blah, blah, blah. Traditional businesses might be owning, selling, retiring. So that's sort of financial. Real estate investors, how to sell a property and so on. Then trading, kind of similar, how to close out a position to either lock in profits. But then it gets a little more interesting. Project management. Exit strategy can refer to a plan on how to transition responsibilities and tasks once a project has been completed, or if it's terminated before completion. Military and politics. In military campaigns of political intervention, exit strategy refers to the plan on how and when to withdraw troops or end involvement. So when to end engagement, right? That's kind of interesting. And it said the strategy is often discussed to ensure there's a clear path to ending an engagement and avoiding prolonged conflict. That's similar to what we're saying. Like, you don't want to get stuck in this prolonged conflict of, solve it, get out. Personal situations might refer to plan has for leaving a situation, job, relationship, commitment. Someone might have leaving a job once they saved a certain amount of money. And the final one was emergency preparedness. And it said in this context, an exit strategy refers to a plan on how to safely leave a place in case of an emergency. So this is your kind of risk management in a way, right? Saying a little bit about, hey, we should have a plan in case of an emergency. How are we going to get out of this situation? I don't know. I thought it was interesting, right? Some of those were kind of cool versions of it. I particularly like the project managed one, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes he has like strategies like, how are you going to hand things off and transition responsibilities?
Yeah, it's a great list. And this is where the risk function starts to grow in a company. They get to a point where I guess compliance does turn into more of a financial risk, longevity, sustainability. First, risk is perceived as legal risk. That
Right.
kind of makes sense. And then it transitions to, all right, we're doing well. We've got the legal stuff covered. What other risk is there? What's like business continuity risk. Um, and then I just always see in the early stage startups is the risk of the assumptions that they're making, which causes failure much more reliably than legal risk or financial risk.
Right.
Startups will complain. Startups will admit the top reasons that they failed after they failed, and it's like uh, how does it describe it? Lack of team alignment issues. The next one is not getting product market fit,
Hmm.
and the next one is being outcompeted by the competition. Um, these are the three areas that founding teams therefore should obviously be focusing on and looking and reconsidering and reevaluating and checking their assumptions. What decisions are they making that causes 85% of startups to fail on those 3 points alone? MVP, they don't achieve minimum viable product or product market fit. They have team related issues. What does that mean? Well, we can start to break it down, but that's for the listener to take away. If you're a founder, you got to really drill into that. If you want, it's not your technology. It's not how fast can you build the piece of technology that you think you're trying to build. Um, so yeah, good
I'd
list.
say what's interesting, first of all, to your comment in Web3 specifically, there's been this paranoia about legal risk, right? Compliance risk. And it's gone way out of control. Not that from a guy where my main project was all about compliance, trying to build a blockchain that would be fully financially compliant all around the world so that people could build everything from DeFi apps to a bank, which was our original vision, which was batshit crazy, speaking of, because it was way out of our reach. And what we did is we pivoted and we said, well, in the process, we were already building this blockchain that would accommodate this because we knew we had to start there. We can't have a bank on chain if we don't have a chain that's compliant. So that ended up being the product, and we pivoted to that. After about 5 months or so, lo and behold, we suddenly started getting funding too. How's that work? Right?
Wow.
Everybody said, dude, I'm not giving you $15 million to start a bank. Like, you don't know what you're doing, and then, it's too far out. Right. So we changed. But, as you're saying, though, let's talk about real risks and why wouldn't you be looking at the real risks? They're right there. As you just stated them, like they're in front of you. Product market fit, team, right? Yeah, people run out of money, but I'd say that's up there, but that's like a kind of a bullshit thing. It's not really a reason, right? You didn't get enough funding probably because of all these other reasons,
Yeah. Or
right?
they
You
run
didn't run
out.
out of money like there was no more money in the world. You know, like you just couldn't get any more money, right? Or you
Yeah,
spent it badly. So the reason you failed wasn't ran out of cash. That's a cop out, right?
I agree.
You didn't run out of
100%.
cash. Or if you did and you just quit, maybe you just said, okay, I'm not going to raise more money, right? Now, that's a different story. But having said that, I'll finish with one last bit of this because this is coming up today too. And I heard this before from an old mentor. And when I first heard it, I thought he was crazy, to be honest. And as I've thought about it more, I'm starting to feel like this may be the way. And he always said, and he'd started multiple founder, multiple multi-$100 million companies kind of guy, right? Said, I have never started a business without finding the customer first. I have an idea, I find the customer. Once I find the customer, I build the product, I set up the service. He said, I've never gone in any company, started well over a dozen. Every month, first month, I was in the black. I've never operated at a loss ever with this philosophy. And I thought,
What a
that's
what a
fucking brilliant,
genius! What a genius! Right?
right? Find the customer
Come.
first.
Oh, that's brilliant.
But doesn't that sound so simple? But how the fuck? Why don't we think that way? And I'll hear people say when I've said this to them before, well, I mean, what are you gonna do? Yeah, you're gonna just throw a blockchain together after you find them? It's like, well, yeah, maybe. If I have a customer who wants it bad enough in their enterprise and I can get them to pre-order at $1 million, then yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Find a bunch of goddamn developers and throw $1 million at them and say, build me a damn product. I mean, listen, people will be reasonable. If it's new, they know it's new. As long as you can solve it and you're reasonably confident that you can execute, then yeah, that's exactly what you do. Or this could be taken another way. Let's say not necessarily a paying customer, but maybe before you get started, you should start asking the supposed target customer of this product you're thinking of, would they buy it? It's not the same because as we know, there's a difference between what somebody will tell you and what somebody will pay for, but it'll at least give you some idea if you're in the ballpark, right? But I just keep thinking this is unbelievable. Like this is the way to go. I haven't had a startup since I learned this, but I want to put it to the test.
One thing to round off for me was,
Bring it home, Gav. Bring it home.
well, what was it about you said, oh, skin in the game, right? What came to mind then is the implications. And when you're evaluating customers, you're understanding what do they need, what's useful for them. What are the implications of them not having this thing?
Ah, right.
Right?
What's the
And you
downside to
understand,
not solving the problem? Yeah.
yeah, that's huge. So I guess to round up, whether it's for the advice of the Doctor Strange Hollywood movie or from the Exit Strategy podcast, learn to let go of some of your biases, and ferret out your assumptions and experiment, thought experiments, actual experiments, and you'll be able to accelerate into the future.